bones. She put it all back by the doctrine of lies. To fuck to mentions, I shall pass to me as I make my way through to the promised land.
Hello, Luís.
Hey.
Hello to all. Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome to our 5th episode already. And today we are still not going again on the sublime object of ideology of Zizek, sequel we were interrupting since last time. Last time we had an episode on interpassivity, this concept of Robert Faller and afterwards developed by Zizek and Mladen Dolar. And we decided to give you the chance to still recuperate a little bit of all we said before, namely with the second kind of intermezzo, which is really linked to the previous episode. And we will talk today about immediacy. And we will base ourselves mostly on a recent book that came out. It's this book by Anna Kornbluh, Immediacy or the Style of Too Late Capitalism. It's a book that I think was published 1 year ago or something. I don't know if it was really a bestseller, but anyhow, it got a lot of attention. There was a lot to do about it. You can find also a lot of reviews online on this book. And I think also this book immediately, for us, resonated with what we are doing here. And I think one of the major interesting elements of this book is the fact that it brings together the whole of the problematic about this thematic of immediacy. So I think as a sort of compilation of all possible ways of looking and concentrating on this concept of immediacy, I think the book is absolutely something you need to read. The book is also controversial, I would say. It's really sharp in its positioning. I think that Anna Kornbluh has not tried to be all too nuanced, and rather tried to write in a sort of manifesto-like style. And that's also something, of course, she plays probably also with that element. So there is a sort of immediate feeling in the way she writes. It's quite it's quite epically written in a very baroque style at the same time, but it plays a lot with double meanings, with a lot of, let's say, stylistic brio. It's a lot about. I don't know if you also had that feeling, Luís, but this is full of terminology, of sort of contemporary terminology, jargon that you could connect with immediacy. Maybe we will come to that also, all these words that she uses. For example, instead of talking about essays, she talks about essayettes and these kind of things. Mostly I put haha next to it. But it's full of that kind of like info-whelmed and so on, like overwhelmed by information. It's called info-whelming and so on. So there are all these kind of little bit terms that are on vogue, which she plays with and that are scattered over the book. I like the book. I think it's a really interesting book. By the way, I don't know if you saw the cover. It's also the cover plays also. The whole book is on the cover. I was just trying to understand what these little letters are. These are all the pages of the book, so you get in fact the whole book on one page. And of course, this plays with this idea that would it be possible to read the book in a sort of immediate way? You know, there are these kind of more so-called Eastern methods of reading very quickly. You know, are these Japanese methods of reading books diagonally that you would be able to read such a book of 200 pages in let's say in 1 hour or 2 hours. I guess it plays a little bit with that idea. Of course, it also reminded me of the story of Jorge Luis Borges, the Aleph, where the guy goes in the cellar and gets a sort of mystical vision of immediacy and would see the whole universe, the whole cosmos appearing in front of his eyes in one kind of immediate vision. So there is also this attempt. Maybe you could eat the first page and you know what the book is about in the most immediate experience. But before diving into the content of the book, in fact, Luís, today I would love immediately to start with an example, something that I would like to a little bit comment on, and maybe also know your opinion about that. And something that she writes, she also starts about that. She talks about this Van Gogh mania of immersive shows, which she sees as one of the most obvious symptoms of this immediacy fever or immediacy hype that we are currently into, as she tries to theorize that. But I had to think some time ago, a friend of mine and colleague Andrew, who lived at that time in Holland, sent me a nice advertisement that he saw on the street of an exhibition that was at that time going on in The Hague, in the Mauritshuis. It's one of these very famous Dutch museums with Baroque painting. I think there are Vermeers there, and there are also other very known painters of still lives, of these naturemort flower pots with a lot of flowers in this typical Baroque way of painting them. And this exhibition was an attempt to give the visitors what it tried to propagate to the visitors, to give an immediate approach or an immediate experience of these paintings. And how would it do that? It installed on every painting a kind of small box. You could push with your feet or with your foot or a shoe on a certain button that was there on the floor. And when you push the button, a smell would come out. And so the whole idea was that the moment that you are in front of a painting, let's say of a flower bouquet, you would push the button and the smell of the painting would appear in your face. And this was what concerned then the flowers, but it went even further than that. For example, I think, if I'm right, there was a Vermeer painting that showed a water, kind of like one of these kind of canals in Amsterdam or The Hague, with dirty water. And so when you would push there, you would smell the rottenness of the fishermen that were there in this canal trying to put out the fish, or you would smell even the gutters. And then to go even further than that, when you would leave the show or the exhibition, you would be able in the souvenir museum, in the shop, in the gift shop at the end of the museum, you would be able to buy a small box with all the smells that you have experienced during the exhibition. So in little tubes, there were, according to fish, rottenness, smell from 17th century Holland, flowers, whatever. You would get an arsenal of smells to take home and to somehow revive this immediate experience of these 17th century Baroque paintings. And of course, I guess the intentions were probably good. The idea of these curators was that these paintings are very far away from, they are very distant from our modern times. And in order for contemporary people to somehow get more near to the world of these paintings, they imagined that they could do that with such a strange immediate mediation, namely to add smell to it. And this is a vogue, and I was checking online. This is something now that is going to be done everywhere in contemporary museums today. I saw already that the Prado in Madrid had a huge exhibition based on that. I think they used a painting by Rubens and Bruegel, which is about smell. It's of course a painting, but in order for people to make it, to get an immediate experience of that painting, they would also put kind of really advanced, technological advanced machines that would be there, and you would go near to them and a sort of like almost in a cybernetic way, like the machine would, when a face goes near to the machine, immediately perfume would come out, and you would smell then these paintings that were exposed there in the exhibition. And the same, I think there is an exhibition in Bremen also, in Germany, that I saw that they were using these devices. Well, and so maybe I would, of course, love to know what you think, what would your comment be on that. But of course, what interests us also very much is, I guess, to try to understand what's going on there. And one, maybe to just give my personal comment immediately on this, and then I give you the word. I would like to know what you think about that also, is that it's, of course, very interesting that in order to lure people in this idea of an immediate experience of these paintings, a whole machinery of almost mediated technology is brought in charge, in fact, in order to give people this impression that they have a more immediate experience of these paintings. And the second thing I would like to say about that is, of course, that we could ask the question: is if smell, if a painting, for example, shows flowers, is there, what's happening there when you how to say, is there not something like a sort of disbelief in the painting, in the potentiality of painting as art happening here? Namely, that curators have the idea that what the painting is showing, but not, of course, making you experience in a direct way because it's exactly painted, that they want to overcome this, let's say, this mediation, in order to try to give you what the painting would then so-called depict. But of course, the problem here is that, are we not reducing a work of art to its content, to its visualized content, rather than seeing it as already a device in itself of mediating something of this experience of immediacy? That would be my first idea. So what do you think? Is this a way to get slowly into the idea of Anna Kornbluh too? I think we need to still... well, I would like to know what you think of such exhibitions.
Yes. And I think what you just said is completely in line with what Kornbluh is trying to criticize. Because the first thing that came to my mind when you were describing this example, there's also a very similar example that happened in an exhibition in Basel a few years ago, where they took paintings with music scores painted on them, and they would make, and I quote, "the paintings alive" by playing what's on the scores depicted in these paintings. And it's exactly the same dynamics, maybe less weird, comparing with smelling rotten or still water. But this, I think, all speaks to this obsession that we have for finding the truth about an object or a person. And this is a point that is completely transversal to the entire book of Kornbluh, is that immediacy is about looking for this kernel of truth, looking for what the thing really is. And yeah, of course, if we are smelling the sunflowers of Van Gogh, maybe you can imagine what Van Gogh really smelled when he was painting them, and that's, I think, the idea behind it. And this is something that, because Kornbluh, and maybe we can use this also to describe her structure and her take to the entire book. First, I think it's important to say, also to be fair to her, that what Kornbluh calls immediacy is, and she knows this, is a sensation of immediacy, not a true immediacy. So she begins with talking about circulation of capital, how that becomes more and more immediate, then to the imaginary realm, then to the writing media, then to the video, and then to theory, and how theory is also embracing this. And throughout all this structure, she's always talking about a fundamental need that we have to find the real meaning behind things, and to find the real kernel of truth in the object and in ourselves. And this example, I think, plays perfectly to that search, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I think you said one moment that people look for the reality behind something. So it's like mediation would be seen not as something that gives access to something, to maybe in the essence of something, but would be an obstacle for that, right?
Yeah.
And so there is this let's say obsession, fascination with getting to the truth, what you said, to the truth, to the essence of something, by in a way by overcoming this mediation. Like I maybe I have some still other examples that maybe I would like to share with you. Some years ago, I was involved in a maybe two examples of there is in Antwerp. I was in the summer in Antwerp in our Museum of Fine Arts, which was completely restored. I was with my kid there, with my son, and there was also one room with Baroque paintings of landscapes, and they were mostly rock formations, like kind of wild, deserted landscapes with rocks. And in order to, strangely enough, mediate these paintings, but so the mediation would be obfuscated, would be the curators wanted to give the people an immediate, almost 3D feeling of what these paintings were about. They found nothing better to make a sort of fiber rock formation. They would put in the middle of the space, so it's like in a sort of plastic fiber, like red painted, brownish painted. And the kids, or even some, when we were there, even some adults went into it. There was an opening on the back, and kids and even adults could climb inside of this rock, in this cave somehow. And it's like almost like in a sort of animation park. So you have to imagine this kind of old-fashioned 19th century museum place with dim lights, and then these very nice landscape paintings on the walls, and then in the middle you have this crazy animation park plastic rock formation for people to enjoy and to experience, almost in a way, what they would see on the walls. It refers, of course, to these rocks on the walls, but what immediately pops up when you see that, in fact, is it's not so much the fun that would somehow, like, let's say, bring up in people that are surprised to see that in such a hall, but it feels, what you feel somehow is a sort of deep embarrassment, almost like a sort of shameful paternalizing push or something towards me as a visitor. Like it's almost that the curators would tell you, look, we don't believe anymore in these paintings. For us, these paintings are, I mean, what's there to see? Like rock formations in the people that painted it were naive, were a little bit almost stupid or naive, and we cannot believe anymore in it. But in order somehow to give you access to the content of these paintings, we will do something crazy here. We bring out we recreate some kind of plastic rocks in order to give you then a direct feeling. Of course, this doesn't work. This is also something really strange, and I think she also points at that a lot of these so-called immediacy strategies, as you said already before, also very clear, they are mostly mediated machines. They are mostly total. They are more. In fact, the funny thing is that such a strategy is in fact more mediated than if you would just look at the painting. The painting itself is almost more immediate than the operations of mediation, of immediacy. The curators put in charge so that you would get direct access to the reality of to the truth of this painting. So that's already very weird. That what you say very clearly, that immediacy is a strategy of obfuscation of necessary mediation, I would say. And so, this paternalizing.
Yes, sorry to interrupt, but what you just said, I think it's really important to stress, because this, if you only add the painting without any strategy of so-called immediacy, of the sensation of immediacy, then you would be confronted with what we talked about in the last episode, with the absence of something. So in these paintings of Van Gogh, maybe what is powerful actually is the absence of smell. The same thing with this painting of Ferran Clough that we talked about last episode. The fact that music is missing because the painting cannot depict music, that gives it really a radical opening where we see this pure, and that's precisely the anxious contact that we are trying to escape from when we build these structures of so-called immediacy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's also interesting that she starts her book with a quote by Hegel, right?
Yes.
And I have been puzzled also with that. I don't know if you have to already start talking about this element. Maybe we can already say something about it, but and I think we did already. So the quote of Hegel is, immediacy itself is essentially mediated. So what she puts there as a kind of motto of her whole book is that that there is no direct access possible. Every attempt to get to something in an immediate way would stumble already in itself on its proper mediation, so to speak. So every immediacy is, as we said already before, is in fact a strategy of obfuscation of its necessary mediated condition, you could say, in fact, no? And what puzzled me a little bit in the book is that that this is a very dialectical way of thinking of immediacy. It means that mediation is maybe somehow the access to something immediate, and on the other hand, immediacy itself is always cut up in
an act of mediation. Yeah,
exactly. But then she starts with, in fact, for me, as if it's as if, because she has this manifesto style, she makes these claims like mediation is crushed by immediacy. She makes these very, very powerful and very strong claims that where she, in fact, I think it's also linked to what she then calls too late capitalism, that we are in a state of emergency where we are, where almost as if she would say, like, look, although I start with Hegel and with a dialectical approach of this problematic, it feels that we are in a state of emergency where even dialectics is not possible anymore somehow, where dialectical mediation and let's say the dialectical unfolding of a concept which seems immediate in its first experience, of in its first approach, in a sort of temporal unfolding, we would then dialectically come or find its proper contradiction, as if she's saying this kind of temporality even is not possible anymore, and everything becomes instantaneous. And it's as if she doesn't really say that, but it's as if this is the tenor of the whole book, that everything is instantaneous, everything is, there is no temporal unfolding possible anymore or something. I don't know if you also had that feeling, but and of course,
yes,
yeah.
Because and I in the sense that the thing that should show us where mediation is, and I mean by this theory is a thing that allows us to see the mediations, is also now being invaded or is following this trend of immediacy. So this sensation that, of course, is something that always happened. No, it's not. I think we should be careful here, because it's not like only in capitalism people feel things immediately or have this sensation of immediacy. This is something that existed since ever, and theory was always the thing that showed how this so-called immediacy was already mediated, as Hegel said. But now we are reaching a point where this immediacy is also occupying the theoretical thought, and that stops that dialectical thinking. So here I would agree with her in this sense.
Yeah, she has a chapter, one of the one, but I think it's the chapter just before the conclusion is called Anti-Theory, and that's exactly what you were talking about, no? Where she quotes this Bernard Harcourt, and Paul Preciado, I think, is also the theoreticians, let's say even in a way old school theoreticians, basically, like at least who have thrown away the mediated importance of all these theories, and going for a sort of more direct, immediate approach, often from a kind of identity politics or from a point of democratization of theory, and anti-elitism also. I think it's also what you continuously feel also when it's about autofiction, for example, writers who mediation is connected to elitism, to old school theory. I think also that something that she is clearly also saying from the beginning is that she's I have the feeling also the book feels absolutely in its totality in the line of somebody like Adorno, for example. I think she even quotes him very
she says it
favorably. Yeah, exactly. And this is in fact, in this sense, maybe the book feels a little bit old-fashioned in that it's somehow without any kind of and that's also why people find it at the same time a refreshing book, because who dares to still write such a book, which is bluntly a blunt manifesto for mediation, for in fact non-direct experiences, for slow reading, for waiting with your feelings, waiting with with your opinions. It's anti-opinionated, it's anti-feeling, it's anti-affect. It's so. Of course, these are trends also, let's say, in the theories that we are interested in, that we know that this is existing, but nobody somehow dared to write such a book in the 21st century, because, well, you would be put immediately in this reactionary camp, even if you, because Anna Kornbluh she's a Chicago professor of languages, of English, I think, but she's openly Marxist. She's a clear left-wing theorist, but at the same time, it's more and more clear that it's exactly left-wing theorists today who seem to are who feel the need to be defending, let's say, strategies and values that were rather connected with central right-wing directions or more conservative stances of culture and so on. So it's very interesting how all that has shifted and how all that has changed. And so
Yes,
yeah,
and you just said something interesting, that it's a class thing,
yeah,
because rich, educated people can go to a museum with no simplifying tools, no tools for immediacy, but it's for the masses, for the poor, uneducated people who need this extra layer of immediacy, so they can understand art. This is what's really annoying
yeah.
about this, because it's
That's
classist. It's completely classist.
no, and it's also very interesting because this, I think, brings us back to what we talked in the previous episode on interpassivity. I have talked sometimes with curators who are engaged in these kind of things, and mostly what you hear is that they say, look, we also don't believe in it. We also don't believe in our 3D installations that we put in these exhibitions where we recreate things in this more stupid way, whatever. But we have the idea, we see that our colleagues are doing it, and we have the idea, indeed, what you say, that people need it in order
Yeah.
to understand art that is very far from us, that is still maybe patriarchal or comes in is pre-modern, and so in order to get still something out of this, we need to it's very strange, this doubleness. It's always this dialectics that comes back. They call it, then they mediate it with immediacy, so to speak. No?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It is the same with, I had this discussion many times with fellow opera singers who really feel the need to translate every opera so that the people who don't speak the original language will understand everything that is going on. And they forget that there's a level of non-understanding that is also fundamental to opera. It's the same thing with painting, or with any art form, is that there's a level of non-understanding that needs to exist, and that is, we can call it true immediacy, or wherever, but that contact with what Roland Barthes called the punctum is really the contact with the end of meaning, with this disintegration of meaning, and that's what immediacy is trying to escape from. And I liked, because I wrote here a quote that Kornbluh um, uh, added to her book that she criticizes, is by Julieta Singh, and that says that the starting point of critical elaboration is the consciousness of what one really is, and is knowing thyself as a product of the historical processes to date. Uh, this idea that what one really is this substantial being, and to think about theory is first to start by ourselves, to really know ourselves, to achieve, because it's not even more this self-fashioning of Foucault is like the step after, is that there's not a self-fashioning, there's a self-discovery of what one really is, and 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 everything is going in this direction. Theory on this, as you said, this, the way to counteract, or to defend from the patriarchal discourse that a man would white straight man would have this Eurocentric vision of the world and would basically claim that is the universal. And of course, this is problematic as such. But as Kornbluh says, we overcorrected it to make it about individual affirmations of identity. And it also reminded me that there's a practice in ethnomusicology is that people, for example, they go to, I don't know, a street market, and they want to sound the sound ambience of these markets. And they go there with a pencil and a piece of paper, and they draw. And the point is, they cannot take photographs because that would be too objective, but they have to draw. So the draw shows their bias in a way, because when you draw, you don't pay attention to the same details the same way. You pick some, and then they draw, and then the next ethnomusicologist goes to the same place and draws again. And the idea is that knowledge is built on the adding these infinity or infinite traces of personal bias, and that is how we advance. I think this is the idea behind this thing with immediacy. Yeah, and it is really frightening that theory is going in this way. And you were just saying that this Adorno, that she embraces Adorno, and she also she makes a kind of historiography of the theoreticians, starting of course with Hegel, but we could go way back. We could go to Meister Eckhart, who already had these theories of mediation as being inescapable. But she starts with Hegel, and then Marx, Adorno, and how this tradition of showing how mediation exists everywhere is being lost and being replaced by, as you said, this identity politics or identity theory or auto theory, the idea that you have to tell your own story and you can tell the story of anything else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's also interesting that you talked about Eckhart and so on, and you before about this whole idea of direct access, and it also reminded me, of course, and you said it already just before, is that of course the desire of direct access of something, I would maybe doubt how much that is a modern thing. Maybe to frame it a little bit more historically, what I was just thinking by reflecting a little bit more on, well, how is that a problem of modernity, of contemporary situation? In fact, it's interesting that we talked about Meister Eckhart. Maybe it brings us to mysticism. What is mysticism or mystical experience other than wanting to see God directly, to have direct access to the divine? That's basically what it means to be in a mystical relation with the divine. And in the Middle Ages, of course, you could say that the most incredible and pure satisfaction you could get of what you could dream of was this idea to see God, as they call it, from face to face, what they would call the visio beatifica. But the interesting thing is that, of course, the whole Christian theology was functioning in such a way that exactly this visio beatifica was barred for normal people and for everybody, in fact. Even it's interesting that even I remember reading Nicolas of Cusanus, who writes in his De Visione Dei, this book on the gaze of God. He says, I myself had never a mystical experience. I never saw God face to face. So, and then you could also think that mysticism in the Middle Ages was not so much about trying to see God face to face, but it was rather a sort of, let's say, a pedagogy almost, a mystagogy, to show people how this access is in fact an impossibility in itself, or that the mediation is the only way of getting access to that. It's also what I think for a big part of Cusanus' endeavor of his writings was a way to help monks and other believers who really insisted on this all too affective, a little bit Bernardian, no Bernard of Clairvaux, this idea of a direct, very sensual and sensitive and affective access to what goes beyond, to the transcendent and so on. And then you see that the whole strategy of Cusanus was trying to show how only mediation is the way to eventually get some access to. And maybe I was then thinking further, what's happening then in modernity, because we are in a sort of secularized, post-religious time. How is it then possible that we are somehow so taken still by this idea of immediacy? And you can, of course, imagine that exactly secularization, I don't know what you think of that, secularization is the mechanism that not only bars God or bars access to the divine, or bars the divine in itself, but it also bars the bar. It bars what religious cultures have installed. In fact, they install access to the transcendence, but this access is always also a distance from it. And in secularized culture, you see that because of the giving up of a transcendent religious realm that would operate somehow in daily life, is that we fantasize continuously on this about immediacy of everything. If you see that how problematic it is also in politics, and there it's, I think, one of the most precarious let's say spheres where this immediacy plays. If you think of immediate politics like direct democracy, populism is nothing else than the people who would take direct power, let's say, or the representatives of the more direct representatives. These are not stupid guys, stupid politicians who don't know really well their thing, but these are people who enjoy instead of the people. So even if this is still mediated, what people really love are politicians who have this aura of immediacy. I don't need to say any names. I think we all know what we're talking about here. But this is a very strange thing that we are drowning in this immediacy, and I don't know. So it's very interesting that there has been always this lure of trying to get to something immediate. Another thing I want to talk with, maybe I stop here, but another thing I would like to talk you afterwards is also this problem of if art should be mediated, or if we should have how is it impossible just to get to art? That's for me still not yet very clear, but maybe we can talk about that later. I would like to know what you think of this problem of pre-modernity with the religious access or bar to immediacy, and then secularized culture where we are drowning in immediacy, let's say.
Yes, and I think there is where psychoanalysis can be useful, honestly. Zizek has this idea that we talked about, I think, almost in every episode so far, of Christian atheism. It's his big, I think, his current big project is developing is this idea of Christian atheism more and more. And it's not this simple, we are atheists, but let's keep the Christian or Catholic practices. No, it's about this idea that there's something bigger than us in a way, and we should still suppose that there's something bigger than us and fight for that till the end, especially knowing that that thing is a fiction. And I think we replaced of course, and in this Christian premodernity, uh, there was, of course, a feeling of immediacy. There was an essentialism that was very present. I think the exception would be this Rhine mysticism, this Jacob Boehme and Meister Eckhart, and as you said, Cusanus. But the dominant or hegemonic idea was also one of essentialism, of a contact with God is in fact possible. And I was thinking, how can we, before getting to art, because I think in the art criticism that Kornbluh writes about, I have some issues with some of our points, but I think we can get to that later. Um, but I would say the lesson of psychoanalysis is that we is not that we make how they say it, this 180 degrees turn to our life, but really a 360 degrees turn of our lives. The idea that you change completely, but arrive at the same place, but different. And this, I think, is what we talked about last episode. The idea that the analysis is this coming close to the non-meaning, as we talked about a lot of times. The idea that you realize that everything is mediated, and you achieve this sensation of lack, of not being a substantial subject, but actually being supported by a gap, by a void, by something that's missing. And from that, then you distance yourself and you try to mediate again with everything, but now you know it's a fiction. So this is, I think it's this 360 degrees turn that we need to do to our lives. And what I think Kornbluh is criticizing is that we made, from the pre-modernity to now, we made a 180 degree turn, in the sense that we went really to the opposite, with everything that's good about it and also everything that's bad about it. That we completely disregarded any sense of what's divine, not in the supernatural sense, but in the sense of what's really there mediating every aspect of our lives. And this is completely endemic to the way we see institutions, for example, and how we see politicians and university and the press, especially, all these institutions that were mediating elements and structures, and that for a good reason are now losing power, and are losing this mediating importance.
Yeah, I agree. And what you call also this divine element, or whatever you would to call it, it's also this element, for example, in art of the unknown. The fact that the painting, that the absolute meaning of a painting, or the closing meaning of a painting, is in fact always escaping us. And I think this, you feel more and more that this brings anxiety to even curators of exhibitions. It's like, and therefore they lose, probably for me, the fact that they then need to create these 3D elements, and it's like they lose belief in the artwork itself. Like it's not just that they think people will not understand it when they don't get all these gadgets of immediacy, but it's also that they deeply have lost the belief in the ambivalence of art, and the ambivalent meaning, the ambiguous meaning of artworks. And of course, it's also this problem of historicism, I would say, that because we have closed the meaning of, for example, artworks of the 16th and 17th century, because they are pre-modern and they are religious paintings or whatever, we cannot believe that maybe these paintings also have an ambiguity. And so we have already decided as curators that these paintings have nothing interesting anymore to tell to us. and we can only see them on a purely, let's say, painterly level of virtuoso painting. They are well painted. Eventually, they show a nice realistic depiction of a landscape. And that's what we
like
have.
a document.
Yeah, exactly, like a document. This is exactly the word. Paintings of the 17th century become illustrations of their own time, rather than that they would jump out of their own time, that they would escape their own time, that they would be ways of artists who try to paint the impossible, or the thing that could not be talked about in the time they were living in. And so these paintings would give access to something universal in this sense to us, because we would be able to not just get to know how the 17th century was, but we would get to know this dimension of the unknown, the absence, the impossibility of that time, let's say. And that would resonate with our own non-belonging, our own not knowing, and so on. Yeah, and this is a sad. It's what you said before. It's like when that happens in theory, in fiction writing, when that happens on the level not only of the artists themselves, but also on the people that should mediate art, curators. If curators become the ones that start to undermine mediation, but start to become the propagators of immersive experiences, of direct access, well, I think we lose the thing in itself. It's in fact by proclaiming direct access to these paintings that we lose the artwork as such, in a way. Maybe just now that you said about these documents, I had to think of an exhibition I was involved in myself some years ago in Antwerp, and that was about a minor genre which was called interior paintings of churches. There was a vogue in the 16th century, first in Antwerp, and then of course in Holland, in the new 17 provinces, so-called the Republic of Holland. There are by Roland Barthes about that, and Susan Sontag also has written interesting texts about these painters like Zanderdam and so on. But this was a genre that was starting in Antwerp, and when we were preparing for this exhibition, I was also a little bit involved in writing in the catalog and so on, and trying to also put music for such an exhibition and so on. And one of the discoveries that I did a little bit myself was that this genre of interior paintings, it's something very interesting, is that in fact before that time, people were not painting really interiors of Gothic churches. So that happened in fact in one particular moment in the 16th century. And what I discovered is that it exactly happened on the moment that this kind of interiors have been destroyed. It was on the moment of iconoclasm, the iconoclasm, the Protestant iconoclasm, of Calvinist iconoclasm, started in around 1566, first in West Flanders, and it went to Antwerp, to many other cities in Flanders, in Germany, northern France, also, of course, in the UK and so on. And a lot of interiors of the churches were completely, let's say, ruined, completely damaged. And this was, of course, a symptom of a huge socio-economical and religious, I could say, cut or quarrel, or whatever you want to call it, in society itself. It had things to do with social disbalance, with the end of feudalism, the peasant wars, and so on. We will not go into that. But so what is so interesting is that these paintings of these interiors, sometimes they were completely empty. They showed empty interiors. Sometimes they had a sort of rearrangement of strange objects. There was always something uncanny and strange of these interiors. And they were, in fact, what my discovery is that they were, in fact, an answer, a sort of mediation to the trauma of iconoclasm. You have to imagine that a lot of families were split also in a religious way. Some were Catholic, some were Protestant, and they needed also elements to mediate this problem, which was not just a religious problem; it was a social problem, an economical problem also. And then this genre of paintings appeared, and so you could say that this weird genre of interior paintings after all, was much more interesting, much more special, because you could say it was a direct approach to something that couldn't be approached, namely this trauma of iconoclasm, also of ruining, of breaking down art, also the value of ruination, the fact that a little bit what Hegel would later call the end of art. I would almost dare to say, and there is Koenraad Jonk here, a Belgian art historian, has a really interesting text about that, where he also claims that, for example, Bruegel started to paint gray in gray, as Hegel would say later. So he started to paint stone paintings, like without colors, in order to almost in a direct way, trying to show how art, after the end of art, would still to be able to continue. The unfortunate thing was that in the end, the whole exhibition was, again, as you said so well, concentrated on such paintings as pure documents, as just documents of how interiors looked in the 16th century. They had then also added 3D reconstructions of churches that disappeared but could be reconstructed based on these interiors that were painted. So in the end, the whole exhibition was just a way of how it was even put in the catalogue that these paintings were worked as a sort of souvenirs. You would visit the city of Antwerp and you would go home with such a small painting as a kind of little postcard that you would buy in a shop as a souvenir of Antwerp, like you would buy a skyline painting or whatever. And so the sad thing is also that, although I think that this exhibition could be about this trauma, the iconoclasm, something that's still very relevant, like also in contemporary cancel culture. In fact, cancel culture is a form of iconoclasm, you could say. So how to deal with that? Could that be a solution for politics and so on? And unfortunate, the historicist approach, as just seeing these paintings as documents, well, one, and then the exhibition, I think, was in this sense a missed opportunity. And this is something that you, in fact, with a lot of contemporary exhibitions, even of old art, you see that continuously, that it's in fact always once in a lifetime experience. You get then all the Van Eycks, all the Bruegels to see at once. You cannot see them at once, of course. It's also sort of fantasy. But nevertheless, it's sold like that. And it completely disavows a more intuitive or essayistic approach to art. I would say a more, a close reading of these paintings and trying to understand how they mediate content and form, how these artists are already conceptual artists avant la lettre, because that's also very clear with people like Bruegel and Van Eyck and so on, that they were conceptual artists. They didn't paint realistically because they wanted to get direct access to reality, but exactly because they believed that reality is always distorted in a way. There is always already a mediation of reality.
Yeah, I think what you just said is really, really important. Is that it's not art that is unfinished, and reality is the thing that art cannot really grasp, but that reality itself is also open in a way. And I think Zizek has been making this point with quantum mechanics all the time, how science is now realizing that God didn't program the entire world to the end.
Yeah, and also Lacan says just that reality is structured like a fiction.
Exactly.
So,
and it reminded me what you were just saying. There's this famous quote by Adorno who says that after Auschwitz, poetry is no longer possible. And Zizek, I think he wrote it in some places as usual, but at least in the introduction to violence, to the book on violence, he wrote, no, after Auschwitz, the only thing that is possible is poetry. Because it is the only thing that shows the really traumatic aspect of what happened in Auschwitz. It's not, if you try to document it, you fail. And Kubrick also, he has this book. Well, the book was written by Frédéric Raphael, which was the screenwriter of Eyes Wide Shut, the 1999 film, the last film by Kubrick. And Frederick Raphael wrote this book telling, after Kubrick died, telling how was the process of making Eyes Wide Shut and all the conversations they had uh, um, about cinema, about life, about everything. And at some point, Kubrick says that there's not really an Holocaust film; it doesn't exist. And Raphael asks him, "Well, what about like Schindler's List?" And he says, "Schindler's List was about a man who saved a couple hundred lives. It was a success story. The Holocaust was about 6 million dead Jews. It was not a success. So there's always this incompleteness." And talking about Kubrick, this remind me, I think, because he really understood this really well. Because
Maybe
in
can I just
1960
add something to that quickly?
yeah,
It's also why Zizek often says that comedies about the Holocaust are in
Yeah.
fact better than tragedies, because a tragedy always has this problem of immediacy, trying to
Exactly.
get to the trauma, while a comedy is mediated, and
Yeah.
the mediation of the comical form. He gives often this example of La Vita è Bella, I think, but there are other examples like that. They manage to well, because of its indirect way, they don't fall in the trap of this. What you just are saying. But sorry.
Yeah. And I was going exactly to make that point, because in 1964 there are two films that come out. The famous Doctor Strangelove by Kubrick again, and I call it the Evil Twin. It's a film by Sidney Lumet, also a legendary director, called Failsafe. And Failsafe and Doctor Strangelove share the same premise. It's about an accidental during Cold War. Of course, this was made during Cold War, during the period of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the premise is the same. There's an accident or a misunderstanding or whatever, and the United States attack the Soviet Union with nuclear missiles, bombs, and there's like this kind of attempt at controlling the situation and avoiding the end of the world. But the difference is that Failsafe is a drama. It really takes the thing seriously. Kubrick began making Doctor Strangelove as a drama, as a real thing, but at some point he realized that's just not possible. That you cannot, if you close it in a drama, you will miss the real traumatic aspect. And it's funny because there's also an interview with Carl Sagan talking about a similar thing, that he says that the Cold War is basically two mortal enemies in a room awash in gasoline, and one of them has something like 7,000 matches and the other one has 9,000 matches, and they are discussing which one they're trying to gather even more matches to assure the destruction of the other, without being aware that one single match basically kills them both. And then he says, if this wasn't real, it would be laughable.
Imagine a room awash in gasoline, and there are two implacable enemies in that room. One of them has 9,000 matches. The other has 7,000 matches. Each of them is concerned about who's ahead, who's stronger. Well, that's the kind of situation we are actually in. The amount of weapons that are available to the United States and the Soviet Union are so bloated, so grossly in excess of what's needed to dissuade the other, that if it weren't so tragic, it would be laughable. What is necessary is to reduce the matches and to clean up the gasoline.
Well, Kubrick, I think, responds to this. It's precisely because it's real that is laughable. And I think this is what Kubrick saw really well, and in more than one occasion, that he was really aware that reality itself is not complete. And that's why I think the misstep in immediacy, also because dramas play also to something that Kornbluh criticized a lot, this idea of the affective response, that if you are emotionally connected to a work of art, then you feel it immediately, you feel it completely. There's this oceanic, as the Freudian term would go, this oceanic, this immersive experience of the painting. And what Lacan shows is that feelings are already a mediation. Feelings are already to distance ourselves from this fundamental anxiety that is the contact with the gap, with the non-understanding.
Yeah, exactly. But can I just add something to that also then? But
Yep.
something maybe that I find a little bit missing then in her book is then exactly what you say now, that anxiety is exactly this. I think Lacan even says that somewhere, that is an immediate, is the only immediate affect or something. Is the only thing that that is that, and as you said, it opens to what Lacan would call the real, or to the unknown, or the void. And so you could ask yourself if this is not something that I would almost have liked that she would have more explained the necessity, or not having thrown away totally in a sort of essentialist way the notion of immediacy, because it's not in a way, and that's maybe we go to this other step. Then I link that a little bit to what the 2 pages she writes on Hegel. Also there, when she says Hegel says that immediacy is an error, but I'm not completely agreeing with that. I think that for Hegel, immediacy is super important. He even says that substance is immediate, being is immediate, and it's in the temporal process of unfolding of the dialectics, from what he then calls in the introduction of the preface of the phenomenology, from substance to subject, that it has to be mediated, let's say. And then even he says that after this mediation, it goes back to its simple immediacy. So there is a sort of so there is a sort of in fact, what Hegel says, just to first go on what I think a more nuanced version, I understand that she didn't have the possibility to develop that maybe in the book, but as I understand it, is that there are 2 sorts of immediacy, in fact, with mediation in the middle. There is, first of all, abstract immediacy. That's, of course, this oceanic, what you also find probably in Schelling, the idea of a sort of direct access to this union of mystical union, almost, but as Cusanus also, but also Hegel would say, is that, of course, this total in itself needs to be externalized. And there is a sort of, and he shows that on the level of God, he shows that in the level of the sentence, with going from the predicate and so on. So there needs to be something external, something needs to be mediated. And then we go back to a certain immediacy, but this immediacy is a mediated immediacy. And so I think, just to say that immediacy is an error and we have to get rid of immediacy, just then to go now to art, I would think, like, for example, let's take the sunflowers of Van Gogh. You gave already this. You can say that what kind of immediacy here is the problem? The problem is probably the fact that it has been drowning into a kind of neoliberal, capitalist, consumerist culture. But you could almost say that the touch, I will use this haptic term, because also the haptic is a notion of a sort of immediacy in art, which I think, how can you exclude that? How can you go around that? It is like that the artwork touches you. And as you said, the sunflower, there is a sort of too muchness of the sunflower. If you look at these sunflowers these are monsters, no? These sunflowers, they are not looking like sunflowers at all. They are like a sort of broken down, disintegrating, monstrous things. That if you, let's say, look at them, you have no idea what you are looking at. It's good that there is the title that it's sunflowers, and we all know that the sunflowers of Van Gogh. So what I want to say is that there is an anxiety provoked by this image, that even if all young people have the poster hanging in their bedrooms, with all consumerists, let's say, a total annihilation of what this painting could still stand for, I think still something of this kind of strange immediacy is let's say safeguarded. And why do I say strange immediacy? I think also here she refers, and I read some comments also on the internet about that. She refers to a very interesting theory of Viktor Shklovsky, the idea of what he called ostranenie. That's this estrangement. It's where the verfremdungseffect in Brecht also comes from. But if you read well what Shklovsky says about estrangement, in fact, what he says is that, for example, he gives this example of Tolstoy when he writes a novel. And he writes, for example, I think he gives this example of flagellation, of whipping, that a writer would, for example, not use the word flagellation, so that immediately all kind of ideas of flagellation would enter our brain. But he would try in a sort of new, immediate way to describe the practice of flagellation, so that we are not really getting we are almost like approaching what it's about. We feel, let's say, what it is about without getting the mediated word. And so what he says is that this kind of type of immediacy is a way of stripping away commonsensical notions of what we think words stand for. And that's also what I think. So just to say that I'm not always so sure that her examples that she tries to, she bashes some authors as being typical autofiction. Knausgård is one of these usual suspects. Well, one of the people she really hates. It's clear. Then she loves, I think, Colson Whitehead. She talks about him. She gives examples in the end that she says that. But in fact, there are, I think you could easily show parts of both novels that are almost in the same way written. And so what I doubt a little bit, if you could really help this whole problematic by trying to get rid of immediacy, sort of essentialistic idea of immediacy, and hoping for more mediation, and that's then the dangerous, almost like even like a little bit reactionary part of the book. I know that it's not really there, but I feel that it's lurking underneath the fact that you would ask to people to have no experiences what that would even mean, but then you would just only go for mediation or something, as if mediation is something immediate, as if there is some sort of immediate mediation. I think it's much more interesting to, let's say, you look at the painting, you have no clue what you're standing for. You are feeling anxious. You listen to music you don't know. You are open to the unknown. Anxiety is filling your body, but you are not trying to get away from this, but you are trying to cope with this anxiety. And what you, of course, then need is mediation. You need mediation to try somehow to frame this feeling of the unknown. And I think so it's about immediacy as oceanic feeling well, feeling good, embalmed in a kind of bath of flashes and so on, as something, a domesticated idea of immediacy, versus an immediacy which would be, let's say, a soft way of getting access to something that almost the traumatic core of art, the radical traumatic core of art. I don't know what you have to say on that. I don't know. I'm talking too much. Sorry.
I think that comes not only. I think I agree completely with what you just said. For me, the most problematic part of the book is that she, in the same line that what you were saying, she tries to conceive of an artistic creation as if it was an applied theory. and that's where I disagree. And it's my it's a very even I think even among Lacanians, it's a quite a typical approach. Is that you will build a praxis based on this theory, uh, without realizing that, as Hegel said, philosophy always arrives too late. Is that the analysis is retroactive. That dialectics, the dialectical process is a retroactive process. So, and this I think it's also the old Adornian critique, no, that you make contemporary music so people don't have this oceanic feeling, so that they only get this discomfort or whatever, and it doesn't work like this. There's some contingency to the art creation that produces these non-meanings. Of course, there's also concept, and there's work, and there's craft, and there's everything else. But there's some contingency that allows these works of art to speak, um, to say something about their own cultures that their own cultures cannot say about themselves. And this is not, I would say, a completely conscious process, or else it would create what she criticizes. It would create art as document. If mediation was the end and the beginning of the art creation process, if we could apply theory to the art creation, we would make domesticated uh, documents, and that's not what art is about. Uh, um, of course, every art object has a studium, as a mediating frame, as a formal aspect that is completely ingrained in culture, but then it has some accident, some place where the meaning disappears. And I'm almost sure that even the artist cannot control this. The artist does not know what he's doing in this sense.
No, no,
The
I
layers of
agree.
non-meaning, that exist in a work of art can only be discovered uh, retroactively, can only be discovered, as we said, and as Didi Uberman says, anachronically. Uh, and that's, I think, the critique that is missing in his book. For me, it's the only place where I really disagree with her, because she argues for an art creation that is ingrained in mediation. Uh, and that might be the case,
Yeah,
but to think that's the entire process, I think it's a misstep.
but it's, I think she also credits too much. She puts too much belief and credit on what artists tell themselves about their artworks. It's not because an
Yeah.
artist or a writer says, "I write directly. I'm directly." That this would then be the only of the writing. I mean, would you not even say that since antiquity, since Pliny, because that's where it also come from, and then also in the Renaissance and later on, that the whole lure of immediacy is the basic, let's say, the basic mechanism of art in general.
Yeah.
That take trompe l'oeil. A trompe l'oeil is well, the what is mediating is the most immediate in fact. Like it's very strange, like how and then of course there is this links also to interpassivity, that people would not really believe in the mechanism of the trompe l'oeil, but would believe that there is a naive observer that would believe it, right? Because it works like that. It works as it works on the level of mediation and of the works on the level of immediacy. We would not believe the immediacy, but we would believe that some people would believe it, but we see through it and we know it's of course just mediated immediacy. So, and then also I had to think of what you were last time talking about, or we talked, we circumvented it, but the Pliny idea of the curtain of Parrhasios, where somebody says to Parrhasius, he went into the studio and saw a curtain, and he says, pull open the curtain and show what you were painting behind the curtain. And then Palazzo says, but the curtain is the painting. So this is a very nice way of how immediacy and mediation completely collapse, and a real artwork is always the lure, or the don't regard, the trap of the gaze, so to speak. Maybe one last example of that from the Renaissance is the notion of sprezzatura. Sprezzatura means that you hide the mediation and you try to make something as immediate and easygoing as possible, direct and immersive as possible, but it's all staged and mechanized and mediated. That's the whole idea. And one of the nice examples also in Italy and in Portugal, you see that often when they use stone facade of a palazzo or a palazzo, that they would imitate real stone with real stone in a sort of mediated process. So they would take marbles, they would polish them, and then they would carve them as if they would be wildly out of nature, and they would put them in as mediated natural stones. So so this is I think this is something exactly. These are all processes that writers, sculptors, painters, musicians work with in order to get people, just to give them access. And so it's not that immediacy is really immediate. It's also what I don't understand. She puts Hegel there from the beginning. In fact, there is no direct immediacy possible. It's also what you said from the beginning. Like every immediacy is already mediated. And maybe the danger is that we should maybe also not fall in the trap of paternalizing audiences and listeners and participants of whatever, that they would, let's say, really, really believe. Maybe interpassivity could be here an antidotum or a kind of nice balancing concept for too much essentialistic immediacy bashing, maybe. I don't know what you have to say still about that.
Yes, because I agree completely. I was thinking, because this essentialism you were talking about, the only way out of this essentialism is by essentialism itself, and that's what we discussed. I think it was in the second episode when we discussed the introduction, that Zizek finds the psychoanalytical essentialism, this idea that you have to identify with the impossibility of identification. It's a kind of essentialism, but it is an essentialism that undermines the essence. That's, I think, what art is really about, is the idea that you are sure perceiving this thing immediately, then you are defending from it in a mediate way, but then you have to come to the conclusion that there's a level of anxiety that still belongs to the painting, and that's there from the start, and that's the thing you take from it. It's not too much meaning. It's the opposite. Is no meaning at all.
Yeah, and this connects very nice what we are going to do next time. No, that's exactly. Symptom. From symptom to symptom. I think this is exactly what you talk about. There is always something that remains, and that we will never get rid of, and that somehow we have to tearing with and so on.